Good evening from Johannesburg. I am Aphelele Somi. Welcome to Let's Have It Out. Tonight and every weeknight here on ENCA, a variety of newsmakers will get their chance to host this program. And we'll give you, the viewer, a chance to get involved in the conversation. Unfiltered, accountable, and accessible. The National Department of Arts and Culture commissioned and funded a study into the factors affecting the cost of books in South Africa, which analyzes all aspects of this question and also suggests possible solutions that can be explored. The study implies that cost is a huge barrier to accessibility of books, as most books sold in the country, about 70%, are purely academic material, with only about 30% of sales being books for leisure and recreation. This raises a curious point about our reading habits. Are the studies conducted an accurate reflection of our reading attitudes in the country, considering that many people might be reading online material, e-books, and getting into audiobooks, etc.? The role of libraries is also another area of interest. Is enough being done in these spaces to make these places of choice when it comes to the desire of reading? Are they underutilized because of the rise of technology making these spaces unappealing? You can be part of the conversation, and this is how.
Tweet us at ENCA using the hashtag LHIO. Call us on 011-759-6340. Or send us a WhatsApp or WhatsApp video on 082-884-6370. And make sure those videos are no longer than 30 seconds, please.
I'm joined now in studio by Read a Book essay founder, author and entrepreneur, Tebogo Ditshego, and author Zanele Dlamini, who join us in the studio. Thank you so much for your time. So if we can just get straight into it and talk about how big a factor cost is when it comes to our reading attitudes in the country. Tebogo?
Well, I think it has a major factor. And as you would know that in our country, you have a very small population that has a lot of disposable income. Mm-hmm. So you will have it difficult, to find people who could afford reading material. Yeah. But secondly, I think that we have an issue in terms of prioritizing the book reading culture. Yeah. If you look at the study that was released by the Shuttleworth Foundation, it found that it's only 51% of South African households that has a single book in the household for leisure reading. And if you look at the statistics around, if a household has a television set, I'm sure it's more than 70%. And so it would be very difficult for us to expose the public to a book reading culture if, one, they can't afford it, two, they don't have access, to reading material. Yeah. We also have an issue in terms of parents reading books to their kids. Now, you mentioned the study from the Department of Arts and Culture. There's a study from the South African Books Development Council that reveals that it's only 5% of parents who are reading books to their children. Now, you wonder what else are they doing with their children? I'm sure they are having chats on their phones with their children. Yeah. They're probably watching television with their children, but they're not making time to read books to their children.
And maybe this is where libraries then come in and become a factor. Are those spaces adequately utilized? What happened to the culture of going to libraries, taking out a book, and maybe even being a part of just the entire space in itself, which makes, I suppose, reading cool and fun and all of that?
I actually think they are underutilized to a certain extent, but also because mostly libraries are actually used by the people in the bigger cities. Yeah. In the small towns, even though you have a library, but the access is very limited to people, or to even children rather. I remember when I was in high school and I needed a book in my small town, a club. But then getting that book out of the library was such a huge challenge because they need your ID, they need your proof of residence, which I think is like that thing that, it's always been the challenge for everyone else. Yeah. And so for us, it's not a matter of actually not getting the access per se, because they are there. The books, even in the libraries, they're actually there. But then we have this system that requires quite a lot for people to actually get the books from there.
And Deborah, would you say that maybe technology has become an almost immediate threat to the library space and almost rendering these spaces obsolete?
I actually think technology is an opportunity for the library space. I had a great opportunity to be an ambassador for the Library and Information Association of South Africa, LIASA. And we visited a number of libraries where they were being opened, especially in some of the remote areas. And you'd find that in the library you had like a computer lab, you had Wi-Fi where people could then go and update their CVs, go and do research. So it can be integrated to the whole library experience. So I think maybe the new library, the 21st century library, should be that which responds to the needs of the community, whether it is to help them to establish their businesses or whether it is to do research for their studies, but it should cater for those needs.
And then another question that I would have, I mean, if we're talking about how poor the sales of books are in the country, especially if you are, not writing in the academic spaces, you're writing novels, etc., then you as a writer then don't really have enough to support yourself just purely on your writing material.
It's such an unfortunate truth, really, that in South Africa, as an author, you really can't make a living out of it, purely out of it. You have to sustain it with a job, your 9 to 5 or whatever, or a business even, but it makes it more challenging, really. However, it is doable. I think that the support is there. It's just the cost. The cost of producing the book itself is quite the most expensive part. And it's what actually contributes to the cost of the book being out there.
And what can you say, Deborah, about, writers in the country not really being in a position to just live off their work in its entirety? You have to sort of sustain it with something else that you do on the side. Yeah,
I think Zanele is making a very important point. And to your first point about the cost of books, writers will have it very difficult if you are not buying their books for two reasons. Number one, if you do not buy books, it takes the cost of books higher. And that is because the cost to manufacture a small quantity of books is exponentially higher than manufacturing a high quantity of books. So if there are low book sales, then the cost of making the book will be higher, which means to the consumer it will be much higher. So I think we need to look around it. Maybe if we can have like a multifaceted approach, from government and the private sector, maybe booking authors and having events for authors to come and speak, and to sell their books at these events, at book festivals. We want to see a situation where South Africa has a culture of reading like in Germany. In Germany, you have the Frankfurt Book Festival, which attracts millions of people. And on top of that, if you do not know a character of one of their bestsellers, they will forgive you quicker than not knowing the character in one of their soapies. In South Africa, we have the opposite culture.
And before we go to break, I want to get your sense, Zanele, primarily around the issue of people now being self-published and maybe the discrepancies around pricing where that is concerned.
I think when it comes to self-publishing, it's much more challenging than traditional publishing. And also because everything comes from your own pocket. So if you don't have the funds to fund it, then it's extremely high. And most of the time you find that self-publishers, we don't have access to editors, we don't have access to proofreaders. And even though you have your product out there and it's not the best that you wish for it to be, you still have to actually price it a bit higher just so that you'll be able to actually cover the cost for producing the book on its own. Never mind the whole point of profit from there. That's just another story.
Relate, of course, the issue of self-publishing and the costing of all of that?
So if you self-publish, you do have more agency around the pricing of the book. You can keep your overheads a bit lower and sell it for a bit less, but it's also difficult to enter the industry and to convince these stores to stock it properly, because they can stock your book, but one will buy one copy, the other will buy 10 copies, which does very little for you at the end of the month.
Well, we continue the conversation after the break. Remember to use the hashtag LHIO on social media.